Great. So for everyone's awareness, this workshop will be recorded. This will be a pseudo webinar, pseudo interactive workshop format today. So there will be some opportunities for live question and discussion, as well as some poll questions, as you probably already see up on your screen right now. We'll use that to kind of gauge not only your knowledge retention, but also kind of how effective we are in communicating some of the topics throughout. This is scheduled for a 90-minute workshop. And I just want to be clear with everyone that the first 60 minutes will be the core content. There's an optional part after that that you can stay on if you think that makes sense for you. So we're going to jump in with the introduction to Brightfields, opportunities and technical assistance available to reuse brownfields and landfills for clean energy. So as I introduce our team, I also want folks to take a look at these kind of intro questions just to know who's joining us today. We got about almost half the people who are joining this core team from municipal government, a few folks from state and tribal governments and communities. And then we have a mix of folks from the private and nonprofit sector as well. So welcome, glad to have you all. There probably will be something for everyone, depending on your background here. And I hope that that is helpful for you in whatever way you interact with brownfields, clean energy, or the combination thereof. A lot of folks here are coming to the table with an interest in learning about Brightfields as a brownfield reuse, but a few folks are just trying to learn if this is relevant for them to think about, and that's great. Happy to have you, whether you have a project in mind or just a passing interest to understand whether it's relevant. And folks have a variety of experiences from clean energy financing to Brightfields to solar procurement and brownfields. So welcome, regardless of the background that you're coming to this conversation. Our team, I'm Matthew Popkin. I'm the manager and lead of our Brightfields Accelerator Initiative here at Rocky Mountain Institute, or RMI. I'm joined by my colleagues, Tansy Massey-Green and Jubing Ji, who also support the Brightfields Accelerator and the technical assistance that we provide to cities and communities across the United States. I will pass it over to our partner in crime here, Claire Weston with the Center for Creative Land Recycling for a brief intro of CCLR. Claire, double checking your sound here.
Yeah.
There we go. You're good now.
You can hear me now? Sorry, I got a message that my mic stopped working. I didn't believe it, but I'm glad you can hear me. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Weston. I'm the Senior Program Manager at the Center for Creative Land Recycling. The CCLR is partnering with RMI to present this really exciting workshop on Brightfields, brownfields to Brightfields. So if we go to the next slide, for those of you that aren't familiar with CCLR, or even for those of you who just need a little refresher, the Center for Creative Land Recycling, we are a 25-year-old organization based in California, but we serve communities as a technical assistance to brownfields provider in regions 9 and 10, which is just that entirety of the West Coast that you see there on the slide, that orange bit. We are one of 6 tab providers across the United States, and our services include inclusive community visioning, acquiring, assessing, and cleaning up and developing brownfield properties, assisting communities through that process, basically assisting practitioners throughout the land reuse and brownfields redevelopment process, meeting you where you're at in that process and helping you along the way. So our services as a tab provider do extend well beyond just Brightfields development, but we will be focusing on Brightfields development here today. So I'll pass it back to Matthew to really dive into the content. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Claire. I really appreciate the partnership. As someone who has worked in the Brightfield space and brownfield space in a prior role, I can just attest to the value of the tabs, whether it's for renewable energy reuse or any other type of service that Claire mentioned there. I've worked directly as a partner with them for many years, or with the tabs for many years. I will also note that RMI has partnered with Kansas State University, or KSU tab. So if you are not in the CCLR region and happen to be joining us today, welcome. We can take that offline at the end of the day to discuss opportunities to partner through that collaboration as well. And if you're not served by one of those 2 tabs, please don't hesitate to reach out and we can figure out if there are options for you. For those of you who are not familiar with Rocky Mountain Institute, or RMI, we are an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating a prosperous clean energy future for all. We do that by leading by example with some of our offices directly, as you see here, but more importantly, through the research, whole systems thinking, and unconventional partnerships that we employ to help support communities in advancing their sustainable energy systems. We've been around for over 40 years, and we are now working not only across the United States, but over 60 different countries. It is our pleasure to be partnered with CCLR and the tabs generally to allow us to expand the services that they can offer and to reach and support more communities like yourselves. And one other thing I'll note, if you're not familiar with us, we are not an energy developer. At the end of the day, through the technical assistance that we provide and the support that we provide, if you are interested in that, we will not be looking for a development contract at the end of that. So if there are any developer friends who are on this call, you should know that we are not your competition. And for the folks who have sites, know that we will not be, looking for us. We don't have a sales motive at the end of the day here either. So we are just here to help you make the most informed and responsible decisions about your reuse if you're considering clean energy. We're partnering with CCLR specifically to help EPA Regions 9 and 10 advance Brightfields through this, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth at the end, but just as an overview, our goal is to educate communities and site owners about brownfield reuse options that include clean energy, provide pre-development site evaluation and analysis to communities if you're considering clean energy reuse, and to provide other technical assistance and tools to help with your reuse planning, funding, financing, and procurement strategies for moving these sites forward. We know that brownfields are complex, clean energy projects can be complex. We're here to try to help make those a little bit easier. So today's agenda is going to focus on, first and foremost, what, why, and how of Brightfields. Learning about the Brightfields themselves, what those truly are, what the opportunity might be for you or your community, and how to start a Brightfield project and what technical assistance is available. We will have a dedicated session for Q&A at the end of all this, but please know that you should also feel comfortable putting questions in our question and answer box or chat feature here. If you have questions throughout, we will pause for questions kind of every section of our presentation to make sure that no one is being left behind here by any of the terms or the processes we're describing. And lastly, as I mentioned to the folks who first joined us at the beginning of this session, we will have an optional office hours for 30 minutes after the main content of this workshop. You do not have to stick around. That will not be recorded, but is an opportunity to ask more site or community specific questions. If you want to go into more detail with us without having to schedule and do follow-ups to coordinate among busy schedules these days. So if you have 2 or 3 gut check questions you want to talk through, if there's a site in mind or just something didn't make sense to you, that'd be a great opportunity to stick around at the end of this. And we will see how many people are there, and we'll field whatever questions you can throw at us, or we'll figure out how to follow up with you if we can't answer on the spot. So in order to make sure that our event goes as smoothly as possible and we follow this agenda, we do have a few ground rules for this virtual event. The first is to be present. So close other apps, close email messaging, ideally, except for Zoom, as if we were in person together. Be prepared for interactive opportunities, as you've already seen with those poll questions if you've joined us from the beginning, where we can hear from you, as well as the Q&A opportunities I just mentioned, where you can participate and ask questions. Secondly, be aware. So keep yourself muted during the presentations and when others are speaking, please. Obviously, if during a Q&A you want to come off mute, that's totally welcome. And then embrace this as a learning environment. It's an educational environment. This is an introduction to the topics for many participants here. And most importantly, this is not a sales environment. So if you do happen to work in the space in the private sector, we're glad to have you. RMI works with the market in a variety of different ways, but this is not a sales environment. This is not an opportunity to tout your services. Anyone who violates that will be removed, and I have kicked people out before. Let you be warned. A couple quick other things. We're going to use the Q&A function or the chat if you can't find that for questions. And that'll be the main way we can help best respond either during the event or during a Q&A portion of the event today. Other than that, it'll just be the poll questions that pop up in your screen. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Tansy, who is going to walk us through a full introduction of Brightfields. And Tansy, take it away.
Great, thank you, Matthew. Hi everyone, my name's Tansy Massey Green. I'm on the RMI Brightfields Accelerator team. And I'm going to walk through an introduction to Brightfields, kind of the 101 before we get into the specific opportunity. So Brightfields, when we talk about Brightfields, we're saying it's any repurposing of brownfields with renewable energy to support a more local and equitable energy transition. The definition of brownfield, many of you probably already know this, but it's a property where the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. And common brownfields include industrial sites, inactive landfills, dumps, old factories, abandoned mines, and closed power plants. When we talk about Brightfields, we're talking about a type of redevelopment where clean energy is built on a former brownfield or Superfund site. And Brightfields come in all shapes and sizes. We have a solar landfill example on the top right, and we have a wind brownfield example on the bottom. And landfill solar and other Brightfields can be adapted to support site-specific needs with purposeful design. So in that, for landfill solar examples, we have solar panels ballasted on top of landfills so that they do not penetrate the cap. We also see wiring that goes on top of the site instead of below ground, again, so that we're not penetrating the cap. And then we have solar panels that can be built around methane monitoring, for example, on a landfill, so that all operations can continue as usual. And then, of course, solar panels can avoid roads or access entries so that, like I said, landfills can operate as normal. So most Brightfields use solar power, but they can also certainly include other renewable energy technologies. So when we look at the distribution of the number of Brightfields that are solar, there's a lot more. There's 423 developed Brightfields projects that are solar, whereas there's only 25 projects that are wind. However, on the right graph, you see that the distribution of megawatts looks a little bit more even because wind has a lot more capacity than solar. But it's definitely a lot, lower cost to do solar and probably more tangible for those smaller projects to achieve a solar project. Municipalities, tribes, and other site owners can leverage Brightfields to deliver a wide range of benefits. So Brightfields are a great way to sustainably reuse land. They're a great way to use existing infrastructure. A lot of the times landfills are built near transmission lines or substations just to be out of the way of other infrastructure. Or of course, coal plants are built near massive substations, so we can be reusing that existing infrastructure. Brightfields can support local jobs and site revitalization. So sometimes when Brightfield development goes into action, they can ask the developer to specifically include a workforce development program that can use workforce from the local community if that is a priority for the local government. Brightfields are also a great way to advance environmental justice. So if, historically brownfields are built near sites with low income residents or they're built near areas with historically Black populations. By revitalizing the site, this is an opportunity to provide environmental justice for the community if that is a priority for the local government. There's also the opportunity to generate local revenue from site reuse, whether that's by having a lease agreement with a developer or a utility, or if the municipality wants to have a reduced energy cost. There's lots of different ways that the local government can create a revenue stream from a Brightfield. And then by developing clean energy, this can also hedge against rising utility bills. We're gonna stop now for a quick poll. Matthew, would you mind launching that? So we're wondering here which of those different priorities might be the most which is the biggest priority for your community? We'll give everyone 10 more seconds to answer this. This is asking which of the benefits is most important for your community? Okay, great. We can close that. Thank you. Looks like lots of different benefits are what folks are looking for here. So it's great to see the different distributions. Great. I'm going to stop really briefly if there's any questions about that Brightfields 101 portion that we just went through. And as a reminder, you can put questions in the chat and we'll have a dedicated section at the end for Q&A, but we like to stop, midway through to see if there's any clarifications we can make early on. Without seeing anything, we just had a question. Do you have an updated estimate on the number of solar projects on landfills in the US? I believe we estimated 2005, which references the 2019 EPA report. Great question. I'm about to get into the distribution of projects to date. So let me get into that section now.
Tansy, let's just give it 30 more seconds, see if anyone else has another question.
Sure thing.
Yep.
All right, I think I'll keep on going then. So as you asked, Kate, Brightfields, this is kind of addressing what you asked, but so Brightfields offer a huge potential market, especially with the new federal incentives that are available, but this market is largely untapped. To the left, this is a map of the Brightfields projects that have been developed to date. This is from EPA's Repowering America's Land Tracking Matrix from 2023. And to answer your question directly, there's, I believe, about 320 landfill solar projects to date, and I'm not sure exactly about the Brightfields in general number. And so EPA has mapped out all of the potential sites there are for Brightfields reuse, and this is about 190,000 potential brownfield sites that are available for clean energy deployment. For landfills specifically, there's 4,300 closed or inactive landfills across America that could host 63 gigawatts of solar. That is enough to power the state of South Carolina. So quite a bit of capacity potential there if we were just looking at landfills. And if we look at the number of projects that have been completed, there's only 530 completed projects, which is about 2.5 gigawatts. And that's through October 2023. So really big potential here for Brightfields. And if we were to look at just 1% of the potential Brightfields projects that there are, those could support about 6 gigawatts of clean energy, which is about 60,000 jobs. So this just kind of shows the scale of the potential across the country. When we look at the completed projects to date, there's only 5 states that host about 60% of the brownfields projects. And as you can see, those are not the largest geographically, the largest states geographically. However, they have, there's clearly something going on at the state level that's enabling these Brightfields to be developed. You do see California in there, which is in regions 9 and 10, and the others are on the East Coast. And so this shows that states, while a lot of states don't have explicit incentives yet, other states are encouraging Brightfields or clarifying processes for permitting and development and potential opportunities. And for example, Hawaii, who I believe we have a couple reps on the call from the state of Hawaii, the Hawaii Energy Office has used EPA's repowering matrix to map out where the potential Brightfields projects are in the states to encourage developers to go after those sites and use them for redevelopment. And this is certainly something that other states can be doing as well. And so while a few states initially led the Brightfields push, these types of projects are becoming part of the clean energy transition across America. So here are a few examples that are not located in those top 5 states. We have a project in Phoenix, Arizona, where there's 10 megawatts built on 118 acres at the city of Phoenix's landfill. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there's 2 megawatts of solar installed on an old steel mill. In Martin County, Kentucky, there's 200 megawatts of solar planned on a mine land. And in Franklin County, Ohio, there's 50 megawatts of solar planned on a closed landfill. And then in California, there's one example among many, 1 megawatt of solar on 10 acres of a former sludge handling site. That just gives you an example of some of the different projects happening around the country, but they're certainly popping up outside of those top 5 states. So we're going to stop now. I want to get to gauge if you have any idea of how many sites are in each state in regions 9 and 10. And we'll give a little bit more clarity on the distribution on the next slide. So here you'll match each state with the number of completed Brightfields in the state. We'll give folks another 15 seconds to wrap up your answers. I know this is a little bit of a longer poll question. All right, let's wrap that up. No need to share the results because I'll give I'll give the answers on the next slide. Great. So there are 47 completed Brightfield projects in regions 9 and 10, and those look like the graph on the left. So we have most of those in California as expected. Those 30 projects are there. Arizona has 7, Oregon has 5. We have some in Hawaii and Nevada and in Washington. And then some other states like Alaska and Idaho don't have any yet, but soon to come. And then this is where there are 10,500 sites pre-screened in regions 9 and 10. So the potential is definitely there. We're looking at almost 4,500 sites in California, 3,400 sites in Oregon, and you can see the rest. There's quite a few sites that could be developed for Brightfields reuse in regions 9 and 10. And the megawatt potential is definitely pretty large in each of those states. California has a ton of megawatt capacity that could be achieved by installing Brightfields on all of the sites. And there's definitely a lot in Oregon, Washington, and other states. I know that California kind of puts everything out of proportion, but we should not ignore these, like Hawaii, these states with 2,600 megawatt capacity available that could be available if we were to pursue Brightfields in all the available sites. And just to put that into perspective, 198 gigawatts, which could be achieved if all of the sites were pursued, is 34 million homes powered. So quite a bit of electricity that could be installed on these brownfields. We'll do another poll here. I want to ask you all where you think the largest projects are in regions 9 and 10. And you can select 3 answers here because the question is which 3 states have the largest completed Brightfields in terms of megawatts. All right, let's close up this poll in 10 seconds.
Sorry, I closed it early, but
All good. You guys were definitely right that California has one of the largest projects, but I'll show you on the next slide. They're actually found in California, Wyoming, and Oregon. And so in California, this is a salt contaminated farmland that hosts 250 megawatts of solar. That's the largest Brightfield project in the country. And then in Wyoming, there's a abandoned mine, and this is an abandoned surface coal mine, and this is the 237 megawatt wind project in Wyoming. Wyoming actually has the largest wind capacity in the country, so there's not many projects going on there, but they have lots of capacity because they're pursuing wind there. And then in Oregon, there's a Columbia Ridge landfill. This is a landfill buffer project, and that's a 100 megawatt wind project. And I say, buffers are also eligible as, they also qualify as these Brightfields projects because redevelopment or reuse is complicated by the presence of the contaminant adjacent to the site. So landfill buffers are certainly included in Brightfields as we talk about them. I'll stop here again for any questions before we get into funding, funding opportunities, and our technical assistance.
Yeah, Tansy, we have a couple questions here in the chat and in the Q&A. Let me take 1 or 2 clarifying ones from the Q&A first of all, and then take a look at the one in the chat, and you can chime in on that.
Okay.
We have a question here on, has EPA Region 2 also conducted a potential Brightfield sites pre-screening study? So the data we shared was from EPA's national analysis there. So we could probably pull that out for Region 2. We didn't for this presentation because this is focused on regions 9 and 10. For tab As part of the TAB grant, can RMI provide support to NPL sites, which are often considered Superfund sites? By and large, we cannot, but we're happy to talk through some of the light strategies there and point you in some directions if you have a site you're actively considering there. Claire, feel free to overrule me if you would like us to look at NPL sites, but generally we have not focused on those. Lastly, in terms of rule of thumb, how many acres are needed to produce 1 megawatt? So that's a very tough question to answer directly. From a rule of thumb standpoint, we do use an estimated about 5 acres per 1 megawatt. That's based on completed project data, which I think technically it's about 5.3 acres per 1 megawatt if you use the actual average there. But that can vary widely based on terrain, topography, wetlands, floodplains, and a few other local site factors. So just flagging that is a hopefully helpful rule of thumb if you're trying to get a sense of what possible scale looks at. But through our technical assistance, if you're interested, we can certainly help you get a little bit more granular there. Tansy, you want to take the question in the chat from Tanya?
Sure. Can I ask why clean energy sites like solar is on undeveloped land? Can these be put on top of existing structures instead? So when we look at Brightfields opportunities, we're looking at sites that are complicated to reuse. And this is because they are contaminated or could potentially be contaminated. They often, or sometimes, if they're like a mine site, they were previously developed and then solar would be going in, once the land is abandoned. And I guess to answer your question, if there's existing structures, it might not be considered a Brightfields project. Sometimes when it comes to landfills, we do have communities that have closed portions of their landfill, and we're able to put solar on top of the closed portions while the other cells are still being filled. Matthew, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, Tanya, to the extent that you're asking more broadly, like why is clean energy cited on greenfield sites? Often it's because the land is cheap or available and large and plentiful in terms of size and contiguousness. So that's attractive to developers from a project economic standpoint. We are leading this initiative because we think in parallel to those explorations and siting decisions that we should be able to repurpose brownfields, closed landfills, and other potentially contaminated placements, other potentially contaminated sites. I do some work on parking canopies as well, putting solar over parking lots or on rooftops as well. So there are a lot of different ways if you're not thrilled with the prospect of putting it over, untouched greenfield. I understand that notion, and this is actually why Brightfields have been welcomed by some communities where they're otherwise not thrilled to displace other greenfield or farmland operations. So this is a great option if you're trying to figure that out or trying to navigate those land use tensions. I see some of those firsthand as a member of my own city's planning commission. So I understand where you might be coming from on that. Brightfields opportunities, in response to Lee's question here, do exist in urban and densely populated areas too. In fact, you actually have quite a few brownfields and landfills in or adjacent to suburban or urban areas because of the needs of that infrastructure to support growing and longstanding populations. In fact, one of the advantages of reusing brownfields is that you often have infrastructure relatively closely located to where the populations are going to consume that electricity. And so that actually helps with some of the efficiency of the systems overall. There are a few more questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to hold on those for now, and we'll get back to those, especially one or two concerning the financials of the system as we continue to work through this presentation. Great. At this point, I am going to continue here. Lovely. Thank you, Tansy. Great dive into the intro there and some of the potential in regions 9 and 10. For this last section here, we're going to talk about some of the funding and benefits of Brightfields. So a few things to note at a high level. Recently enhanced and existing federal incentives actually make clean energy reuse even more financially feasible than they did before. Well, of course, we're referring to the Inflation Reduction Act primarily, but there were some incentives through the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed in 2021 as well that are relevant here too. Existing tax credits for renewable energy development are available. These are site agnostic often, though there are a couple nuances to that. These tax credits, the investment tax credit or ITC and the production tax credit or PTC, those have existed actually for over a decade. They were recently enhanced and expanded through the Inflation Reduction Act in summer 2022. New financial incentives and mechanisms have been created to support Brightfields development. We'll talk about those in a minute. And multiple federal grants available to invest in renewable energy projects on brownfields and in energy communities, which I will define in a moment as well. The important thing to note is these are increasingly priorities called out, maybe not as the sole purpose of federal grants, but subsets or subsections of federal grant opportunities that might be one potential reuse of a broader opportunity. New federal tax credit adders, as we're calling them, or bonuses, as you might have heard them refer to, now incentivize projects like Brightfields to make local investment go even further. So these incentives focus on with what are you building the projects? So domestic US sourced materials, domestic content, as it's often colloquially referred to, where the projects are located matter. So clean energy installed in energy communities, which can include there are like 3 definitions of what meets the energy communities criteria. That's census tracts where coal plants have closed, or census tracts that are adjacent to coal plants that have closed, or fossil fuel plants that have closed, I should say. And then communities or specifically on eligible brownfield sites. And there are a few ways to qualify as eligible brownfield sites that we're not going to go into right now, but if you're on the fence and trying to understand that, we can discuss that offline. Or in the Q&A if everyone wants to hear about that. The clean energy installed in tribal communities or in low-income communities as well also gives you a potential bonus. And projects under 5 megawatts that financially benefit tribal communities or low-income communities is also a specific adder. And so what this looks like is you see that base credit at the bottom here, that 30% for investment tax credit, meeting the key standards for how the project is constructed. And then you can stack one or more of those adders there, mostly at 10% per adder, with the exception of the financially benefiting low income or tribal communities adder, which could be 20% for eligible projects here. So it is possible to get 70% back in a tax credit. If you are a tax exempt entity, don't worry, there's still hope. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, also created the mechanism of direct pay or elective pay, which allows tax exempt entities to basically claim these tax credit benefits as a direct payment instead. So again, we can go into far more details on this, but just wanted to make sure that you don't feel like this is not applicable to you. It very much is if you're a developer, if you're a utility, or a tax exempt entity. So by understanding what's possible in those key incentives, in the sites, in the potential that Tansy described, communities and site owners, and hopefully some of you here, can include Brightfields as part of a broader community revitalization effort. So again, there are hundreds of thousands of brownfields available across the country. Technical potential of Brightfields can be significant, and there are new and enhanced federal incentives to advance Brightfields. So that is a quick overview of the funding. With that, we're going to launch another little poll question here to have some fun. So as just a quick pulse check here, how are you feeling after learning the basics of Brightfields? Generally the what, why, and how. We'll talk about a little bit more of the technical assistance in the meantime. Again, these answers are anonymous, so you won't hurt our feelings if you are really just looking forward to lunch or you don't think this is a fit. We just genuinely want to know where you are in your head based on this, down and dirty overview. And again, if you've already submitted your answer here, definitely feel free to keep adding questions to the Q&A or the chat feature, as we are addressing those both live and in the discussion sections when we break for that, or the Q&A. Good. Let's go ahead and end this. The good news here is that most of you are still excited or intrigued by this, which means we have generally done a good job of giving you the basics here. I understand some of you might be looking forward to lunch, depending on the time zone you're on, and I hope the lunch fulfills your expectations there. So with that, want to bring up, you saw this slide before. We bring it up here again because as we start to think about technical assistance and the role here of how we can support you, what's important is to understand what benefits you're most interested in too. So, communities can leverage a whole range of benefits. You can design projects intentionally to achieve one or more of these. You can try to achieve all, but you can't always, get the perfect project. We will do our best to help you design as close to the perfect project for your community as makes sense. But it certainly does depend on your market, your utility setup, and what your energy market or state energy policy market will allow for. I do want to highlight some people have already asked about closed landfills, so I want to talk about a couple particularly promising benefits here for hosting solar energy on landfills. Landfills typically have pretty good sun exposure. There's not a lot blocking them because there's not a lot you can do with them other than manage the cap when they're closed. So they typically have good sun exposure and other characteristics that support solar energy installation, not a ton of shade, not a ton of obstacles. They have limited reuse options. I dare you to show me a project where you've built a new state-of-the-art hotel on a closed landfill, or you're about to build a new school on them, but you can strategically and responsibly site solar on landfills, as over 318 other projects can attest to. And then from an environmental justice standpoint, Tansy mentioned this before, but landfills often offer a sustainable, non-hazardous reuse of sites that were often previous areas of environmental injustice. Not all, but many sites were located in predominantly Black and Brown communities and other communities that have just been historically neglected. And so this is an opportunity to make landfill solar part of the solution. We are under no delusions that this will solve any or all environmental justice. Sorry, that will solve all environmental justice problems. This is just a small piece to that equation, but perhaps a step in the right direction for those living nearby. And from a potential for scale, landfill solar is highly scalable. There are thousands of active landfills in the US and many other thousands that are already closed or inactive. So even if yours just closed, you can start to think ahead. Planning for reuse with the closure in mind is a great planning for closure with the reuse in mind, is a great way to kind of get ahead of that and make sure you're setting up the closure process for the future reuse. And frankly, just leveraging or reactivating land that otherwise you would basically put out of commission. So highly encourage folks who do have closed landfills to think about this. That's one of the many benefits of landfill solar. A great example here is Houston's flagship landfill solar project that's in development right now. It highlights the potential that Brightfields have as catalysts for change. This is estimated to be a 52 megawatt project on a 240 acre closed landfill, including 2 megawatts of community solar, where multiple residents and neighbors can be off-takers of that solar specifically. It's not just all going into the retail market overall. The world's largest landfill solar project that's in planning and permitting right now, and it's predominantly in a low-income and historically marginalized Black neighborhood in Houston. And then the project is spurring federal, local, and private investment in solar and STEM workforce training for over 175 Houston residents. There have been multiple grants, congressionally directed spending, and other incentives that have helped support this project too. So with that, Tansy, I believe we have one more poll question to throw into the mix here.
Not here.
Not here.
In a little
Okay.
while.
Just kidding. So we'll break here for questions again. I did see, did we address yeah, so hopefully the person that asked about special federal tax incentives on brownfields, hopefully what I've already shared clarified that. The main one to know is the energy communities incentive, which either applies on a census tract basis or on a site-by-site basis for eligible brownfields. If you're not sure how to characterize your site, we can certainly talk about that. For a quick general question here on how long do solar fields last and what happens when those are no longer viable or damaged, there are a lot of depends on how your contract is structured, ways I could respond here, but in general, developers will typically try to plan your project for 20 to 30 years, depending on the technology, depending on what their preferred business model is. You can generally expect solar panels to last a good 25 to 35 years of operation. They will continue to last, but the overall efficiency of electricity production will go down. Ultimately, a meaningful amount after that point, where it's probably either you can either let them kind of continue to degrade there and produce electricity still in some part, or you can replace it and upgrade the technology there and continue to do the same thing with a fresh contract. So you have a lot of options there at the end. I would say the same thing with wind turbines. When you have damage, again, it depends on your contract structure, but in theory, that should be something that you either work out with your insurance provider or the developer, depending on the contract structure, whether you own the panels or the wind turbines, or whether you're paying for them as you go. The most straightforward way I'd suggest to address this in communities where you have concerns about this is to simply say, hey, let's make sure all of our concerns are on the table, and let's make sure that the RFP, if you're going through procurement, specifies that you want a clear end of life or decommissioning process for the system, or clear production guarantees or warranties in the event that there's damage. And then you make sure that that's reflected in the contract. I'm not a contract attorney, so I don't consider that legal advice, but I will just note that you have multiple vehicles from contract to procurement where you can try to address those types of questions and concerns. It's a very important question, though. I believe we addressed the local revenue question, and I don't see, I see one more quick question here. Generic interconnection costs. Oh, that's a tough one. I've heard estimates as much as, $1 million per mile in terms of distance away from a substation or opportunity to interconnect. That's something we do look at as part of our technical assistance. So if you want us to gut check something to see, how feasible or marketable do you think that site is given its proximity to existing electrical infrastructure, we can certainly take a look at that. Melissa, I don't have the California Brightfields examples off the top of my head right now, but Tansy might have that, and we can address that in the chat if we have that right off the top of our fingertips. If not, we can follow up with you offline. Great. I'm going to move on here and wrap us up with just a few more things. As some of you have already pointed out or asked about astutely, Brightfields are not without their complications compared to undeveloped or vacant land. There can be assessment or cleanup costs, though typically in the brownfield space, as many of you probably know, you generally try to clean up to the intended reuse. And if this intended reuse does not involve school children or a lot of people actively on the site, you may have fewer cleanup costs necessary to effectively prepare the site for a clean energy reuse. Certainly federal, state, and local regulations at the permitting, zoning, land use, or environmental review can add complexity to these site requirements. In fact, we're actively working with some state DEQs to better understand some of the best practices in this space. Site remediation timeline. Delays add risk. Perceived delays can add risk to developers. And so if the site timeline looks like it's going to be particularly onerous or extensive, that could increase either the risk, the cost, or the potential failure of the project. Liability between stakeholders. We haven't seen a ton of these examples yet, but getting clear on who's responsible or who might be the environmentally responsible party, if that's applicable in some of these sites, can either add complication, perceived risk, or just be important generally to be clear on as you proceed with this to see if it's worth your time. And then, as we've talked about a little bit, grid interconnection can be valuable here. Grid interconnection can be a potential hurdle here, as the costs and timelines can vary substantially between projects. We often encourage folks to get clarity on that earlier on in their planning process if they are trying to move a project forward. We could go into any of those in a lot more detail, but for the sake of time on this introduction, what I will say is, frankly, at the end of the day, when you're thinking about a project here, each of the following factors here can shape how a project may be planned and developed. Community goals, capacity, utility, regulations, site-specific factors, those all come into play when you're shaping and planning your project. We'll ask you a lot of questions, somewhat along the lines of this checklist here. I'm not going to walk through all of these here, but we'll send this out in the slide deck in terms of how you can strategically and technically reuse the site and assess the feasibility of this. These are just some of the many questions that we would look at in more of a technical assistance type role to see if that truly makes sense for your community and makes sense for the technology that's used. We don't have a particular advocacy position, if any, on this. We're here to make sure that the site reuse is responsible and aligned with your goals if you're trying to move this forward. Now I believe we have a poll question, Tansy.
Yep.
So this is another pulse check, but putting it simply, now that you know about the opportunities, what are you thinking? Again, this is anonymous. You will not hurt our feelings. We just want to get a sense of how aligned this might be with some of your interests. Or if you came here today thinking, hey, I think I have a project, we'd love to know if you still feel that way, or if you think that we have either talked you out of it or talked you into it.
I think we can give folks another 10 seconds here. All right, I'm going to end the poll.
Great. Actually, looking at about a third in multiple buckets here. I don't blame you if you have a lot more questions. Frankly, I still do, and I've been working in this space for years. If you don't have a site in mind, we can still talk with you. In some cases, we've worked with communities to look at an existing portfolio of brownfields and help you figure out if any of those might make sense. So definitely don't hesitate to give us a shout if you want to get a perspective on that, especially for sites that you may not have other economic reuse plans for. And if you have the perfect site, where do you sign up? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. So just to wrap us up here, what I'll note is, as we mentioned at the beginning, we're partnered with CCLR and other tab providers. We're currently funded to support communities in regions 5 through 10. Obviously, we targeted a lot of the information today with you through our partnership with CCLR, regions 9 and 10. If you're outside that and you're within EPA regions 5 through 8, please don't hesitate to reach out to us as well. This technical assistance is at no cost. This is free to you thanks to these partnerships. So if you're in any of those states in regions 5 through 10, definitely reach out. If you're outside of those, still reach out, and there might be some other options that we have, but I can't promise you the same services at this moment. In case you didn't know where your regions were, that's where they are. So what technical assistance is available? In short here, we can help you identify your most promising Brightfields, whether you have a site in mind or not. We do this through a combination of pre-screening, reuse planning, and utility engagement to see kind of, is there a there for the site? If so, then we start to look at funding and financing guidance, unpacking those incentives that I mentioned in greater detail to see which are applicable, if any, and providing assistance on how to integrate your potential project into a potential Brownfields grant application if you're trying to get funding for assessment or cleanup. Last but not least, we do support with procurement because, again, we're not going to bid on the other end of that. So if you need support thinking about an RFQ or RFP structure or some specific language there, we can offer you templates, examples. We can directly help advise on those and provide insights from the Brightfields market and developers specifically. You don't have to go through this in order. If you already have a good site and you're like, hey, I need some help on my RFP, we can just jump right into that. So you can kind of pick and choose from this menu as to what will be most appreciated and give us a shout. But at the end of the day, our goal is to make this as straightforward as possible. There is no application for technical assistance here. We'll have a little screening call after this with your community. If you're interested in this support, where we can just talk through some of your site conditions, some of your goals, and see if your needs are a good fit for the technical assistance we can provide, and if you like working with us. So that's how we want to do this. We know there are a ton of different applications out there these days. We want to make this as easy as possible for you and your community. So in terms of geographies, as I mentioned, we're in regions 5 through 10 plus tribal communities nationally. What's the application process? No application, no cost. Give us an email, send us an email, or reach out to your tab contact and we can discuss. And again, the scope varies based on the stage of readiness, your needs, your community goals, and what you'd like our help with. So at the beginning, we talked about the what, why, and how of Brightfields. I believe we covered that at least at a high level here. So hopefully you have a better sense now than where we started. We had time and many questions, frankly, throughout the discussion. I see one or two others that have trickled in from participants to try to get to a deeper understanding of renewable energy technologies as part of a reuse strategy for brownfields. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, we will have optional office hours after we close out the formal part of this program, where if you have a specific site in mind, or if you can stick around and we can have a little bit more of a specific discussion there, just to know if like how valuable a follow-up conversation would be, or how valuable, what type of technical assistance would make sense for you. Or if you just have a really specific question that you didn't want to share with everyone else that you wanted to run by us. We can do that all in the next office hours. There's no separate link. You'll just stay on and we'll give an opportunity in a couple minutes for people to drop off if they're not interested. If you don't have a specific question, but are just curious to listen and learn, feel free to stick around, and I hope you enjoy your lunch while you do that.
Matthew, why don't I launch that last poll, our exit poll, as we continue a few things.
Excellent. Thanks, Tansy. So Tansy just put up a poll here. This is helpful information for us to know how effective these kinds of educational sessions are. We take your feedback seriously, and we do make adjustments. We've done this kind of a presentation probably over 50 times, and it has changed almost every time based on feedback that we get. So please, whether it's a deep substantive answer that's been sitting in your head since minute one, or just a quick thought or suggestion, or something that worked really well, please don't hesitate to offer that. I'm going to offer a few final notes here while you fill out this poll, and thank you in advance. So a couple things, slides and recordings will be shared by the end of the week. So you'll get all of those to refer to. If you are interested in the technical assistance, you can reach out directly to myself or Tansy or to your tab point of contact. Or you can specifically note in this exit poll right now that you're interested in this, and we'll follow up directly with you. So you have a multitude of ways of getting involved. And again, you can also just stick around for the next 30 minutes through our office hours to ask specific questions or indicate that you're interested in a more deep follow-up. We've been working with over 25 different communities across the country so far on Brightfields projects. And our goal is to help you feel more comfortable with this. If you want to do it, we want you to feel more comfortable. We want you to understand how to do it responsibly. We want you to understand how it might work in your energy market or state policy environment. And we want you to understand the basics of clean energy along the way. There were some questions that were, Brightfields agnostic or site agnostic here, but more just about clean energy. We get those all the time. And that's really valuable when you're working with, especially in the brownfield space, with departments who, brownfield departments often don't deal with energy issues. Planning departments don't often deal with energy issues. Economic development offices don't always deal with energy issues. Even sustainability offices don't always deal with energy issues. So if we can bring some helpful clarity to your consideration and know whether that makes sense to move forward with, we are here to help. Here's our contact information. I'll leave this up while I address a couple quick questions here, and then we'll shift into the office hours as people continue to fill out their exit poll survey. So again, stick around. If you do want to have more of a conversation with us about a specific question or site, if you don't, that's okay. You can also stick around just to listen and learn from others. But we will stop recording once we get to that point, so we can just have more of a discussion and dialogue. Great. I'm seeing generally a pretty good response to some of the questions in the chat. Looking over here, question from David in the Q&A. Are there technical documents available such as different types of ballasted systems? Yes, There are some technical documents either from us, from other market consultants, and from the US EPA and NREL. We can certainly share those based on whatever your question specifically might be. We can also share photos or other examples of projects that have been built that have avoided, to your question here, penetrating a landfill cap or liner using ballasted systems like the one actually right behind me here in Maryland. So we have examples we can share. We have RFP documents that we can share. Really a whole range of things that might be helpful depending on your exact question and situation, David. So don't hesitate to shoot us an email there and we can dig in, or stick around for the office hours and we can figure out exactly what would be helpful. Good. We'll leave the exit poll up for maybe one more minute here. Tansy, are there any other questions that I've missed here or that you want to
There's
add?
one about used panels getting recycled. Did you already answer that?
Oh, I did not. Thank you. So solar panels that at end of their life, which we're just starting to see kind of that wave, that generation of panels, some can be recycled. My understanding is that there are active efforts right now in the industry to improve the recycling ability and reuse opportunities for solar panels or some of those materials. I'm not an expert on that type of reuse at the end of those project lives. But otherwise there is guidance out there as to how to properly dispose of those, but there aren't really any harmful chemicals that come with solar panels there. So it's more just a question of dealing with the specific physical infrastructure and disposing of that appropriately if you're going to go that route. Pretty sure a lot of companies nowadays are starting to recycle those.
All right, I'm going to end this poll so that we can kick off our office hours session.